Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's chat. My name is Tara, and I'm a team member here at Understood. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding your child's frustration with school, and we are so excited to have Tim King joining us. Hi, Tim. How are you?
I am well, Tara. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Tim, would you like to take a moment just to briefly introduce yourself to those joining us?
Yes, ma'am. So my name is Tim King. I am Director of Exceptional Student Education for Flagler County Schools. I have a passion for helping students. Some of the areas that I work a lot in is student discipline or discipline reform, where we address behaviors, root cause of behaviors, and how to build a discipline system that teaches our students. And then the other area is working with students with disabilities. Both students who have been identified fully through an individual education plan process or students who have a disability and we're working at a 504.
Thank you. I do want to remind those joining us that we will be taking parent questions today. We'll try to get to as many as we can. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. And it is helpful if you provide your child's age so that Tim may give a more targeted response. So let's get started. Tim, I have to ask you, what are the differences between anger and frustration?
That is a great question. So, frustration are the feelings that we have. Typically, it is when we can't do something or something has annoyed us. Anger is an emotion that is a response to being frustrated. And while not everyone's comfortable with it, anger is a basic emotion that we all experience.
Got it. And what does frustration and anger look like in kids?
So it can manifest itself in different ways. So typically, students don't immediately become angry. So typically, you can see frustration build. Frustration can be small signs, such as a student withdrawing themselves, being distant. Same signs as irritability. So, student may begin fidgeting, kind of tapping, some hand wringing. And then as we move to anger, we normally see more demonstrative behaviors that are presented, more physical acting out, sometimes behaviors that would be categorized as being aggressive. That moves us from frustration to anger typically.
Okay, got it. And what are some reasons why kids feel frustrated about school?
So, my experience is a lot of frustration comes from not being able to complete the task at hand or not being able to do what is asked of them. Um, Students oftentimes really want to please the adults in the room, or please parents who are at home. And when they're put in situations where they can't be successful, we typically see their frustration levels grow.
Got it. And how can parents help their child manage these feelings better?
Start with basic conversations, that it's okay to be frustrated, and then talk about things that we can do when we're frustrated that will prevent us from taking the next steps up into becoming angry. So, talk to them about being able to talk to a teacher, being able to vocalize, here's what's wrong, here's why I'm frustrated, and then some potential solutions to situations that easily frustrate your child.
My next question is there any advice for how parents can find out what is causing their child to feel frustrated?
Yeah. So when I work with parents, I one of the most common questions is, "What did you do at school today?" I would not ask, "What did you do at school today?" I would ask, "Tell me the things that you've done. How did your day go? What didn't you like about today? What did you really like about today?" When you ask the question of what didn't you like about today, you typically will hit on things that frustrated your child during the day.
Okay. And in the classroom, what are some strategies that teachers can use when a child feels frustrated?
Yep. So when a child feels frustrated, teachers really have to work to get to the root of that frustration. It really should be front loaded. So I always encourage teachers to build relationships with their students. I also encourage teachers to do check ins with their students in the morning, but also check ins at midday and check ins at the end of the day. Some people argue that it is a lot. It is a small amount of time and it can be done very quickly.
Okay.
And now you have a couple different checkpoints where you know what's going on with your student, because that's important. And once I can identify here's why they're frustrated, then I can do things like re-explain something that you didn't understand. I can give you an opportunity to share because sometimes students become frustrated because I really, really wanted to answer that question and I didn't have an opportunity. Just building that relationship and checking in with them will give you enough information to find some very reasonable solutions.
Got it. And Tim, do we see frustration more at certain ages, would you say, or is it kind of every child is different?
So every child is different. We typically see the greatest level of frustration with students who um, suffer from the ability to fully communicate or fully express themselves. Because that frustration typically, um, they don't have an appropriate outlet for it. They don't know how to tell you that they're frustrated. So we often typically see that frustration build.
Got it. Okay. And would you say, in your experience, have you noticed, do reward systems help? Are they helpful at all when you're trying to manage your child's frustration?
So managing student frustration typically does not fall in a reward system.
Okay.
Reward systems, when they work well, they work to prevent some high level behaviors, but
Okay.
frustration is typically initially so low, the reward system isn't enough to prevent it. It really is about communicating what's wrong, um, why you're not feeling engaged, or why aren't you feeling like you can communicate the issues that you're having.
Okay.
Yeah, we typically don't see those in the behavior system.
Okay. We are starting to get some parent questions in.
Okay.
So one question I'm seeing is, how can parents work with teachers who don't seem to understand their child is frustrated by not being able to do the work?
And so this is a common question that I work with staff on. So as a parent, you're always going to be the greatest advocate for your child. I would ask for a parent conference. I would explain to the teachers the signs that my child has when they're frustrated and ask the teacher just to look for those signs.
Okay.
And then I will also um, ask the teacher or share with the teacher things that I do when I see those signs. That makes it easier for the teacher to identify, but then it also gives the teacher some immediate resources to be able to address the frustration.
I asked this question earlier, but if you can just touch a little bit more on just ways that parents at home can help their children. So I know that we
Yep.
talked a little bit about, you already gave some advice, but if you can just touch a little bit more on it, that would be great.
Yep, no, not a problem. So really, it starts as basic as it is. It starts with the conversation between a parent and their child, because parents need to know what things frustrate their child.
Okay.
And once you know those things or things that frustrate your child, then it really does become easy to build solutions. Um, Again, a ton of frustration with students come from their inability to understand or to tell you that they don't understand something. And so, as parents, when you see that happening, you teach your child how to ask for help, how to voice that they're frustrated. Um, you can give them some tricks and tips. You can teach them how to work with the teacher to have signs, because some students don't like to readily admit that I don't know this. So we develop signs. Some are hand gestures. If I do this, this means I need you to circle over to my desk.
Okay.
And that works for all grade levels.
Okay. Our next question, thank you. Our next question comes from Gloria. Gloria says, are there any techniques to use in middle school when building relationships between teachers and students seems to be harder to do?
So middle school students are always interesting. Coincidentally, they're my favorite group of students to work with. My experience is to build relationships with middle school students, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. You don't have to understand all the new crazy lingo. You don't have to know every new pop culture thing. You just have to show them that you care, and be open. Share a little bit about yourself, and be a person who has ears that will hear them out and they help them with solutions.
Our next question comes from a parent that says, my son is 7 years old. He has Tourette's syndrome and is also in the middle of having a dyspraxia assessment. He gets so angry when he is at home, especially when doing homework. So this parent is just asking for some tips that you may have.
Yeah. So the first thing that I would do is I would look at the homework and I would chunk it. so that we're not trying to tackle the whole thing at once. I'll break it into very small tasks, one or two questions at a time, depending on his tolerance level for the word that he's not understanding. I would also ask the teacher to work with the parent ahead of time so that the parent has some idea of what's going to be coming, because there may be some things to prepare the student. At 7-year-old, let's say they're just working on some basic math problems. I would incorporate some hands-on pieces, some number lines, some manipulatives, things that make it easier for that student to navigate through those concepts.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question comes from Neil. Neil says, do you have any tricks or tips for kids and students who have challenging behaviors would be helpful if you could share? So I'm sorry. So that's tips and tricks for kids with challenging behaviors that would be helpful.
Okay, so literally, I just finished presenting to a group of principals this morning, and part of our conversation was on how do we address our most difficult behaviors. And the reality is, you have to find out why. Every behavior has a root cause. And that's one of our other administrators offered that in the room, and it's so true. So there are a ton of things that you can do once you know what the behavior, why the behavior is happening. So, but before you can have a trick or a tip, you got to find out why.
Okay.
Typically, you can kind of categorize it as a behavior that allows me to escape from something or avoid something, or behavior that's happening because I don't know how to do something. Those are two very basic lanes, but those might be a good starting point.
Okay. And then once you know the why, like what would be the first step after that? If you have established the why that your child is frustrated, what would be the next step to take?
Yeah, and so let me unpack it as like an example. So,
Okay.
If I'm working with a student and I discover that the why is escape, and that is escape is because the content is too hard for them.
Okay.
So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm going to teach that student that when content is too hard, you ask for help. That is immediately going to take the pressure off that they have to do something that they can't, and then I'm going to find the appropriate level that works for them academically and give them level at that work and build it up to where I need it to be.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question comes from Monica. Monica says, my 8-year-old son has ADHD, and I have found his frustrations are stemming from his inattentive issues. What are some easy, quick interventions I can share with the teacher to help deal with these frustrations?
Yep. For students, typically ADHD, very common things that we do is chunk assignments. We also give students frequent breaks, and we also create their workspace a little differently. And by that, we give our students opportunity to stand or walk around their desk. Sometimes we call it the box. And so we teach students there's an invisible box around your desk. As long as you stay in your box, you're okay. So it allows for some body movement, which typically helps with some of the focus issues that we see.
Our next question comes from a parent that says, my daughter is 12 years old and was recently diagnosed with ADD. We currently have a 504 plan for her, but her past teachers have deemed her as a difficult student and have passed this information on to her new teachers. Should I request a meeting with the principal?
I would. If I would first start for a meeting with the new teacher. If there's already been a meeting with the new teacher and that has not gone well, then yes, I would ask for a meeting with the administrators. In that meeting, I would talk about the strategies that work.
Okay.
And the frustrations that my student face.
Thank you. Our next parent says, my son is 10, has ADHD and dysgraphia, and has been to therapy for several years, but still is constantly frustrated about school. Do we need a new therapist or a new approach to deal with his frustration?
Yep. So after a couple years of working with a therapist, if results have not been met or progress have not been made, it is best practices to move and work with somebody else who can offer a different set of strategies. As far as the true frustration within the school, again, I would ask, what frustrations are we seeing? I'll really try to map those out and start finding some areas of success and then build on those.
Okay. Our next question comes from Melanie. Melanie says, I've requested behavior observations to be done for my fifth grader. However, the school wants an adjustment counselor to do the observation. Do you think this is sufficient?
I do. I do. Very much so. So, having an adjustment counselor comes in, does not commit to anything other than doing what's been requested, and that's completing the observations.
Our next question comes from a parent. It kind of travels a little bit back to something you touched upon earlier, which is finding out the why. So the question is, how can parents and teachers figure out why a behavior is happening?
Yep. In the most basic sense, you have to ask, what did the behavior get them? So if the behavior only happens at math time, then the why would be because the student struggles with math, in the most basic sense.
Okay.
So that you ask, what does the behavior get? A behavior is only successful when it gets what it is intending to do.
Okay. Thank you. The next question comes from a parent that says, my son is in high school. His teachers and 504 coordinator do not know the signs of ADHD and attentiveness. How do I educate them? Then the follow-up question is, his 504 is not to his benefit because of their lack of knowledge.
Wow. Okay. So I will say, as a school-based administrator, and I'm smiling because I have relied on some of the wonderful literature that is provided through Understood and shared that with my staff. So that honestly, that is a good starting point. And then again, as a parent, I would talk about the things that I see that work. And when I go into the meeting, I would have a conversation of, here are the things that we know work and how do these translate over to accommodations that can help them be successful.
Next question. What can you do with a twice exceptional kid who excels in some subjects but is frustrated by where they're struggling?
Okay, and I apologize, Terry. Can you ask me one more time, please?
Sure. What can you do when a twice exceptional student excels in some subjects but is frustrated by where they're struggling?
Okay, you have an honest conversation about sometimes there will be some frustrations and some struggles, but then you look specifically at the struggles that the student is having, and then you start to work for solutions within those struggles. So, what are some small milestones that we can do that build success, that we can then take and remove that from being a struggle for that student? What are the barriers to that student being successful? We find those, we can remove frustration.
Our next question comes from a parent that says, my son is more angry at home than when he is at school. He holds it in. But his tics and his anger just seems to explode, even over the tiniest thing. Do you have any ways to help?
Yeah. So I would say oftentimes home is a safe place. And we do see where students will, what I say is work hard all day to hold it together, and then they come home and they're in a very safe place, and they show a little bit more of their frustration and anger. Again, as the parent, I would ask, what areas are frustrating my child? And then how can we move to minimize those frustrations? Do we need to adjust the schedules at home? Do we need to adjust, homework? Do we need to move dinner time? Do we need to incorporate some physical body movement? There are a couple different things that you can look at and try. But a lot of it is going to involve just trying to tweak that initial schedule at the house to find where the frustrations are happening.
Our next question, do we see frustration in high school students, and what are some ways that we can help high school students manage that emotion?
Yeah, so we do see frustration in high school students. And high school students typically handle frustration a lot differently than elementary students. When I see high school students that are frustrated, we typically see them start to miss school or miss a particular class that frustrates them. And so the ways that we deal with high school students is when we identify frustrations, again, we work to try to find the root cause of it. And then we try to engage them with people that can help them. So a mentor, a teacher that they're connected to, a workspace that's quiet and allows them to think. We invite them to tutoring. Anything that we can do, again, to remove the barriers that cause frustration are the approaches that we take. But we don't typically see the physical aggression that we see in like elementary or even an early middle school student. With high school students, we just see them kind of disconnect and check out.
And Tim, what about when those frustrations that a student is experiencing are not academic based? Like, what if they're having problems or some difficulty getting along with their peers? Do we see that happen, or?
We do, and so and we actually see that K through 12.
Okay.
When we start to experience frustrations that are not academically related, but are more based on behavior or social emotional connections, we take opportunities to give explicit teaching to our students in social emotional skills. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually fairly simple. We also share those things with our parents, depending on the student's ability level. Sometimes it's just pulling them into a lunch group where we actually foster the environment with a group of students and they come in and eat lunch and we talk about frustrations and how do we get along, strategies for finding friends, strategies for solving problems. There are students who need some are more severe or more profound. For those students, we build social stories. And we look to generalize those social stories at school and at home.
Got it. And I do have a question. How do you know when an approach is not working? Like, what are there any signs that you'd be able to pick up on to know, like, hey, this is probably not working?
If the student continues to have the behavior or the frustration, it's
Okay.
not working.
Okay.
When it's working, you will see change. Something what I tell our staff, what I tell parent groups is look carefully because sometimes that change is slow. But if you have been working at this solution and a week has gone by and you don't see any difference at all, that solution probably isn't one that's going to work. You need to be reaching back into your bag, seeing what else you can come up with.
Our next question comes from a parent that asks, what actions can be taken when the why is a lack of understanding or mainly due to the approach of inquiry and exploration, wherein the child is expected to discover or find their own without guidance?
All right. So when the frustration is born out of a lack of understanding, as a parent, they really need to work with the school because the school needs to relay some foundational pieces for that student to build on. It is very common for us on the school side to ask students to complete a task that they don't have the foundational level to complete, where they don't have the discovery, learning, or exploratory skills to go find it on their own. And so, as the educator side, we have to set the tone for our students to be successful. And so that's the conversation I would have as a parent to my child's teacher. Just directly, my child's frustration is born out of the inability to be able to complete this task. How can we scaffold it, or how can we set a foundation for them to be able to build on and be successful?
Our next question comes from Tanya. Tanya says, my 16-year-old son is frustrated with school because he is bored and does not like to socialize too much. He does not struggle academically, but it is a daily struggle to get him to go to school. Any suggestions?
Yep. So I would reach out to the school guidance counselor and see if there are any clubs on campus that may interest her son. Um, Students who do not struggle with academics, but just not really interested. Again, those are students who aren't necessarily engaged in the school culture. So I would ask, how can that school engage them? What can they attach themselves to? Are there things on campus that that student can do that they really like? So that's, for example, if that student is a student who's really into technology, are there things that they can do for the school that help them to utilize their technology skills that then becomes a draw or a why I want to be in school? Because if I'm in school, I get to work on this pretty cool project. And that's a common piece that we look for with our students who get all the academic content, but they're just not engaged and frustrated by having to show up every day.
And our last question comes from a parent that says, my twice exceptional son really struggles with not being perfect, losing, and failing. Are there any tips on how to teach him how to handle the learning through mistakes without the meltdowns and the self-hate talk?
Yep. So this is actually a pretty common one, and um, board games, as basic as it sounds, pull out board games. Board games are designed so it's basically a game of chance. Even with the greatest strategies, there's going to be some opportunities to lose and to fail. And so we play a lot of board games with students or young people who don't like to use or not lose, excuse me, don't like to lose or not used to failing.
Okay.
And we play board games because inherently they are going to lose a game, and then we deal with the frustration and teach them that there'll be another opportunity. I know it sounds really basic, but we've had a lot of success with it.
We do have room for one more question, so I did get one
Okay.
in. Our parent says, my 2.5-year-old is frustrated every time we even mention school. He cries for a while every time we drop him off. How can we make the school going experience better for him?
And I want to clarify, 2.5?
Yes.
Okay. At 2.5, there's going to be some natural attachment to the parents. I would ask the teacher, are there any activities that, or the parent can even offer activities that the student really, really enjoys? So really high interest activities. Can those be some of the first things that the student do when they come in? Typically at 2.5, the classroom setup for them is pretty fluid normally. So the teacher will have some flexibility in that scheduling. I would schedule a really high interest activity that grabs that student when they walk in the door. And I would also preview that for the next day. So tomorrow when you come in, here's this great thing you're going to get to do. And I'll start that again every day when the student's walking in.
Our last question comes from Christine. Christine says, I know this is frustration for children with the school, but what about parent frustration with the school? My 13-year-old has expressed she likes one-on-one learning, but the school doesn't want to do this.
One-on-one learning can mean a lot to depending on where you are. So without the ability to ask a lot of clarifiers, what I'll say is that I'll ask for a meeting, and I'll ask, are there opportunities for one-to-one tasks that can be completed through the day or small group tasks? Again, not real sure all of the details, but definitely ask for a meeting and ask what's available. It may not truly be one-to-one, but if it's small group, a teacher can give one-to-one attention within a small group.
Thanks, Tim, so much. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for joining us. That is all the time that we have for today. If you have a question that was not that we didn't get a chance to get to, feel free to check out our community at u.org/community. And to check out the full chat and all of our other chats, feel free to visit u.org/calendar. Thank you.